Some murder cases go cold for decades. The evidence dries up, the witnesses disappear, the detectives retire. But then, out of nowhere, something totally random cracks the case wide open. A traffic stop, a DNA database update, a dying man's confession, a remodeling project gone strange. These are the cold cases that were not solved by brilliant detective work. They were solved by pure accident. Let's get into it. The Golden State Killer was caught because of a family tree. For decades, the Golden State Killer terrorized California. Between 1974 and 1986, he committed at least 13 murders, 50 rapes, and over 100 burglaries. Law enforcement had his DNA but no name to match it to. Then in 2018, investigators uploaded his DNA to a free genealogy website called GeneMatch, a platform people use to find long-lost cousins and build family trees. They were not looking for a genius breakthrough, they just ran out of options. The upload revealed distant relatives, and investigators spent months carefully working backward through family trees until one name kept making sense. Joseph James D'Angelo, a 72-year-old retired police officer living quietly in a suburb of Sacramento. Detectives collected his DNA from a discarded coffee cup and pizza box, items he threw away in public, and it matched perfectly. He was arrested in 2018 and later pleaded guilty to 13 murders. Without that genealogy website, built for hobbyists tracing grandparents, he might have never been caught. A routine traffic stop exposed a 27-year-old murder. In 1998, a woman named Rhonda Noel went missing in Washington state. Her husband, Dave Noel, told police she had simply walked out on the marriage. Investigators could not prove otherwise, and the case went cold. Then, in 2012, during a completely routine traffic stop for a broken taillight, officers ran a background check on a passenger in the vehicle. That passenger happened to be connected to someone who had information about Rhonda's disappearance. The stop triggered a fresh look at old records. Under new pressure, a witness finally came forward and revealed what had really happened. Dave Noel had killed his wife and staged her disappearance to look like she had left voluntarily. He was arrested, tried, and convicted, all because of a busted taillight and a random traffic check that had nothing to do with the case. Sometimes justice hides behind the smallest of detours. A renovating couple found human remains in their walls. In 2017, a family in upstate New York began renovating an old farmhouse they had recently acquired. The house had changed ownership several times over the decades, and no one had any reason to suspect anything unusual about its structure. However, as construction workers started tearing down interior walls, they made a shocking discovery that immediately halted the renovation. Human skeletal remains wrapped in plastic and concealed inside the wall cavity. Authorities were quickly called to the scene. Forensic experts carefully recovered the remains and began analyzing them. Through advanced identification techniques, investigators were able to determine that the bones belonged to a woman who had been reported missing in the 1980s. At the time of her disappearance, police had conducted an initial investigation, but the case eventually went cold due to the lack of a body or strong evidence. The discovery of the remains reopened the entire investigation. Detectives revisited old case files, re-interviewed witnesses, and re-examined preserved evidence using modern forensic technology that was not available decades earlier. These updated methods provided new insights that helped identify a suspect. Eventually, charges were filed in connection with the long unsolved case. What began as a routine home renovation turned into a major breakthrough in a decades-old missing persons investigation. Showing how hidden evidence can resurface in the most unexpected ways. A prison inmate accidentally confessed to an unsolved killing. In 2009, a man named Henry Lee McCollum was serving time in a North Carolina prison for an unrelated crime. During a jailhouse conversation that he thought was private, he began talking about a murder from 1983, the killing of an 11-year-old girl named Sabrina Bowie. He did not know that the person he was speaking with was passing information to law enforcement. The confession was detailed enough to reopen the case. Here is where it gets even more complicated. Two other men, Henry McCollum and Leon Brown, had already been convicted of that same murder and had spent decades on death row. DNA testing eventually proved they were innocent and the real killer was someone else entirely. The accidental confession did not solve the case in a clean way. It unraveled decades of injustice and pointed investigators toward the truth. The wrong men were freed. The real guilty party was finally named. It all started because someone talked too much in the wrong place. A pawnshop receipt led to a 30-year-old cold case. In 2015, police in Georgia were conducting a routine inspection of records from a local pawn shop. Pawn shops are legally required to document every item they buy and sell in order to help law enforcement track stolen property. During this routine paperwork review, a detective noticed something unusual. A piece of jewelry that had recently been sold matched the description of an item stolen during a home invasion in the mid-1980s. That old case had long been considered cold and unsolved. As the detective used the pawnshop's records to identify the person who had sold the jewelry, when investigators contacted and questioned this individual, they discovered that the person had more knowledge about the original crime than expected. As the investigation continued, it became clear that this was not just a simple case of stolen property being recovered, but a potential breakthrough in a decades-old murder case connected to the burglary. This discovery triggered a deeper investigation. Detectives reopened the old case files and re-examined physical evidence that had been stored for more than 30 years. With modern DNA technology, they were able to test the evidence again and find new leads. Eventually, a suspect was charged with the original murder. Remarkably, the entire case was revived from a routine pawnshop check that initially seemed completely unrelated to a cold homicide investigation. An old newspaper photo identified a missing person. A woman named Lori Ruff spent years living under a false identity in Texas. She married, had children, and appeared to live a normal life. When she died by suicide in 2010, her family tried to learn more about her real past and hit a wall. Everything about her life before 1988 seemed to not exist. Investigators were equally stumped. Then a researcher working on an unrelated genealogy project came across an old digitized newspaper photograph from the 1970s in Idaho. The image showed a group of children at a community event. One of the faces looked strikingly similar to the woman known as Lori Ruff. Also, the researcher passed the tip to law enforcement as a casual observation, not expecting much. But investigators pursued it, cross-referenced records, and were eventually able to piece together the real identity of Lori Ruff, who had been living under the stolen identity of a deceased child. The case became a landmark example of how cold case identity mysteries can unravel from something as small as a newspaper photo spotted by someone simply browsing old archives out of personal curiosity. What all of these cases show us is that justice does not always work the way we expect. It is not always the brilliant investigator sitting under a single light bulb who cracks the code. Sometimes it is a traffic cop doing his job, a couple knocking down a wall, a genealogy hobbyist looking for their grandmother, a pawn shop clerk filling out routine paperwork. The truth has a strange way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it gets buried or how long it stays hidden. If you found this video interesting, hit like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which case shocked you the most. There are plenty more stories like these, and we will keep bringing them to you.